Hi, everybody. Good morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. I'm Uri Heilman from 70 Faces Media and JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. And I'm so thrilled that you've joined us for this important conversation about Israel's record on water and environmentalism. This is part of a series of conversations that we're hosting at JTA, pegged to Israel's 75th anniversary. And I'm thrilled that we have with us two very distinguished guests who are experts in this area, and I'm going to introduce them now. We have Maya Jacobs, who for 10 years served as the CEO of Tzalul, the Israeli Environmental Association, and helped turn that NGO dedicated to the protection of Israel's rivers, water, and sea into one of the country's most important and influential non-governmental organizations. She recently left Tzalul and now is the co-founder and CEO of ClimateNet, which works to help bring Israeli society to net zero emissions through a variety of ways. We're also fortunate to be joined by Seth Siegel, a writer, lawyer, activist, and serial entrepreneur who is the author of the best-selling book, Let There Be Water, Israel's Solution for a Water-Starved World, and more recently, Troubled Water, What's Wrong with What We Drink. Seth is the co-founder of several companies, including Beanstalk, the world's leading trademark brand extension company. And he's also a senior fellow at the University of Wisconsin Center for Water Policy and a member on the Council of Foreign Relations. Thank you, both of you, for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, welcome. So I want to start with just giving a little bit of a good news, bad news picture of what's happening in Israel. Israel is now a country that recycles much of its wastewater for agricultural use. It has become a world leader in desalination. So there's enough water to go around in Israel, despite what may or may not fall from the sky. In recent years, Israel has cleaned up many of its waterways, including famously the Yarkon River in Tel Aviv, thanks in large part to consistent pressure from organizations like Tzalul. Much less pollution is flowing into Israel's waterways, rivers, streams, and the sea. And beyond water, Israel is reducing its active coal fuel power plants and replacing them with cleaner burning natural gas. It's also increasing its renewable sources of energy like wind and solar. And of course, the country has a very active recycling program. If you go to the supermarket in Israel, you'll be asked to pay a small fee if you want to use plastic bags, etc. Unfortunately, Israel is also a country where if you walk around in Israel's natural places, go on a hike, you'll see plenty of garbage. Under Naftali Bennett's government a couple of years ago, Israel imposed a tax on single-use plastics like plastic forks and spoons and paper plastic plates, but then the current government revoked it. Israel's policy on climate change muted. Okay, sorry. Israel's policy on climate change, experts have decried as mostly lip service until recently, when Israel committed to reducing its emissions by the year 2050 with some concrete numbers. So I'm just curious to hear from both of you if what I said paints an accurate picture, if this is what you think about when you think about climate. Maya, let's start with you since you're shaking your head.
I wish I just wrote down everything that you said, because none of the above that you mentioned almost is not happening as being declared by the government or being properly done. It's true that there is less pollution in the rivers, but all the streams and rivers that are floating to the sea are polluted. The treatment of waste is beyond failure. The sea is being highly threatened by offshore drilling for gas and oil, and by the Eilat Ashkelon pipeline, which is a huge oil pollution threat to the Mediterranean, coast and to the Eilat Bay, and through that also to the water security of Israel, because we are totally dependent on desalination, and without a clean sea from water, then we cannot desalinate our water. And these days, the government not only canceled the plastic, the disposable plastic law, which is really absurd, but they are promoting a list of very problematic rules and regulations that are going to basically abolish the power of the Ministry of Environmental Protection to secure the safety of the health of the people and of the of nature. And basically, we see that the Holy Land and the holy lives of people who are here are not as important to them as that of money and power and greed that seems to be pushing the way things are being determined and promoted here. And I'm being gentle with everything and short. I have a lot more to say on this.
Okay, there are a lot of questions I'd like to unpack there. It sounds in some ways similar to the situation in America, where, of course, the government is limited by all kinds of corporate interests. Seth, what's your view of Israel's record on an environmental record, and particularly the water situation?
Well, those are maybe two different things. And I just want to say that my expertise is not in contaminants or plastic forks and spoons, but it is in water from a perspective of water scarcity as well as the quality of drinking water. And from that perspective, Israel gets an A++. It doesn't go to any one government. It's been a long time process. But if everything in life is fairly done on either an absolute basis or a relative basis, Israel in either of those scorecards does very, very well. On an absolute basis, Israel has abundant amounts of fresh, clean drinking water for its public. It has very low levels of leaks in its pipes, far lower than not just its neighbors in the region, which is abysmal. We'll talk about that later, maybe, but even far lower than what we experience in the United States. I happen to, by chance, just be in Tel Aviv for a few days right now. I just got in. If I look haggard, it's just a little bit of my flight and the jet lag. But far better than the U.S., far better than most advanced countries. And then on a relative basis, if you compare Israel to countries that are whether wealthy like Israel is now, or countries that are in the region, which is the Middle East is the most water-stressed region in the world, it's really something of a marvel. And I would say miracle, except miracles in the hands of God, and this is mostly a human dimension, which is that people here have, as I said earlier, abundant amounts of water. There's really no limit. People can shower 3 times a day if they choose. There's enough water for agriculture. There's enough water for industry here. And in terms of the quality of the drinking water, you may not like the taste of the water, it's possible, but in terms of the microbiology of the water in Israel, it's as safe and as clean as anywhere in the developed world. And you can very safely drink out of the tap from Israel. You may not want to, but you can. And so from the more narrow, and I'm sure Maya is right, but from the more narrow about the environmental hazards, or from the more narrow perspective that I look at, which is water quality and water scarcity issues, Israel is actually quite a light onto the nations. And if I might just add one other word, not only is it theoretically a light onto the nations, but in my work, which is somewhat global in nature, I can tell you that there isn't a place in the world that isn't just awed by what Israel has done on water. Thousands and thousands of government officials come every year. Government officials, utility directors, and so forth from all over the world come to Israel every year to learn, to see what Israel has done. This is not to promote my book, but Let There Be Water, which you referenced in the introduction, is now out in 24 languages, on sale in 50 countries. It's been a bestseller in a number of countries, including countries that don't have a single Jew there. And when I query, why would you want to read this book? The answer is routinely because we have grave water problems, and we want to learn from the best of the best, which is Israel.
If I just might add for that just a second, I agree with the majority, the vast majority of what Seth said, and I do think that we are very, very lucky to have desalination and to have really the vision that started with the days of Ben Gurion, who said that our main problem is water and we must become leaders in taking care of our water security and scarcity. But we must be aware that as much as we are lucky to have desalination, the government puts the majority of its water security onto water desalination, as I said, without protecting the sea, and at the same time is not treating sufficiently the groundwater, and therefore we do have many problems. So I wouldn't go as far as giving an A++. It's A++ on innovation, but not on taking care of itself.
No, my A++ was based only on two criteria. One is the water safe to drink out of the tap, which is not the case in vast parts of the world, including in this region. And second of all is in the accessibility of water. One never has to be told you can't have water on Thursdays, or you can't flush your toilets the next 24 hours. That just doesn't happen in Israel. So in those terms, which again, maybe I'm being unfair to the environmental cause by narrowing the scope of the conversation, but in the terms of where the books I've written, about drinking water and about water scarcity, there's really just it's beyond debate that Israel is a global star.
Maya, when you talk about the problems with groundwater, tell us a little bit about what you mean for a layperson. What does that mean exactly?
It means that our aquifers are running very low. Some of them are almost drying out. As when the water drains down, then it becomes saltier, and some of them are very polluted. And the country, the vast majority of the country already is covered with melt and cement, and with cement and roads. And the more it happens, then the rain, our blessed water doesn't actually go back into the ground. A lot of it is just, it goes straight to the sea, and it takes very good soil with it, and it makes a lot of pollution to the sea. And there's not enough effort onto catching this water and to saving and preserving every I forgot the water. Drop of water. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so
but can I just say a word about this? By the way, I agree in principle with what Maya said again, but again, on a relative basis, compare this with Southern California or the Imperial Valley of California, or the most remarkable example is in the US, the Ogallala Aquifer. It's an aquifer that took hundreds of thousands of years to form. An aquifer is an underground water source. It's the groundwater that Maya and you were just referencing. And this covers Nebraska down to Texas and great parts of the Great Plains in the Midwest. And it's just incredible. I mean, we started pumping that aquifer basically in the 1930s, 40s, accelerated right after World War II. And that aquifer in many places is bone dry now. And we've pumped out something that took thousands of years to form. We've pumped out 2/3 of the aquifer already to grow corn and wheat and soybeans that are mostly shipped out of the United States. So it is, I completely agree with you. The groundwater of Israel is definitely in distress, but but the largest reason for that is not because of a bad pumping policy. The reason for that is climate change and the ever drier winters and the amount of rain that falls in the winter. So this past winter was a good winter, but it's not enough to recharge, which is a formal word for refilling the aquifers, the underground water supply. So it's true that Israel has a very big problem with its groundwater. And it's true also that Israel has, through industrial development and economic development, has lots of very developed areas of the country. So it's hard to absorb the rainfall. But I think that again, I'm not trying to be Israel's defense attorney here by any means. I just want to be sure that everyone who's listening understands that there's gloom and doom here, and there's depressing information, but there's also some very upbeat news as well. The last thing I want to say is, and I read about this at some length in both of my books about rainwater, is that in an idealized sense, catching rain and then turning it to drinking water, which a lot of people think is what we're talking about, and I want to just reinforce, I know Maya is not talking about that. That's actually a very bad policy, because once rain hits the ground, it picks up all kinds of contaminants, and makes it very difficult to turn it into drinking water. But what Maya is completely correct about is that to the extent that water can be captured and then fed back into the underground water supply, that's essential, and it's not being done enough.
So Maya, when you talk about how Israel's treatment of waste has been a failure, are you talking about the fact that waste is released, the effluents are released to the sea for the most part, or that
You spoke about trash. You spoke about the plastic bag law, which I'm very proud to say that my organization was the one that pushed it forward and was responsible for it, and therefore I was even more disappointed to see that it's not enough. It's not sufficient. We also passed the law. We're partners in passing the law of charging for the big plastic bottles, and everything is just managed very poorly in Israel, and the trust is deteriorating. People don't really believe that it's being treated properly, and they don't know where to throw the trash, and there's not enough there's not the proper treatment of trash, and so we're in a big problem in this field. There's a lot to be done, and not enough done.
And I have nothing to add. The only thing I know about solid waste is that I'm very zealous about looking for the number on the recycling triangle, whether it's a 1 or a 2, and I recycle every one of those. It drives my family a little crazy, and I compost all of our food waste. So I'm gonna take all of our paper products and cardboards and newspapers, and I bring them to the proper recycling as well. So I'm a recycling good guy, but I really don't know anything about solid waste, and that's way beyond the scope of, I thought, tonight. But even if it's not, it's way beyond the scope of anything I know about. So I'm going to trust everything Maya says and add nothing on any questions about that.
And don't get me started on it, because I have so much to say.
Well,
sure.
I want to mention
Maya,
Maya,
we're gonna have to trade phone numbers so I can keep hearing more.
Happily so.
Okay.
I want to share a couple of things that visitors to Israel might see that are kind of trademarks of the country that feed into this conversation. So one is that when you go to recycle plastic bottles in Israel, you'll see these huge cages on the sidewalk filled with plastic bottles. That's how many Israelis recycle the bottles. Now they're also eligible for funds. No, you're saying no, when you take them to the supermarket, you don't get.
They took them because of adding the funds for the bottles. Then they took out the cages, because now they have financial they're afraid of crook. Yeah, so they're afraid of crime developing around it. So they took them out, and then they're not collecting the bottles properly, and that's why everything is failing, because they took out these cages actually.
Interesting. Okay, so the cages are gone, but Israel still has these, and has had for decades actually, the paper recycling on sidewalks, and in many municipalities they also have it in people have it in their own garbage rooms. And another feature that Israel's had for decades are the solar panels that heat hot water. So Israel was a pioneer, I guess, in the 60s in heating hot water by solar power, but only in recent years has solar power really picked up, and I want to talk about that too. And then finally, Seth, when you mentioned the draining of the aquifer in the United States, it made me instantly think of the Dead Sea, where diversion of water from the sources that flow into the Dead Sea, as well as draining of the Dead Sea itself, has transformed the sea, where it's now actually the southern half of it is virtually gone. And also the sea is bordered by all these sinkholes, because the groundwater that held up the soil is gone. And there actually have been places in Israel that have had to be abandoned because of the Dead Sea. So that's one area where we see all kinds of interest drawing from the sea that are really threatening this global treasure. Maya and Seth, are you aware of any efforts to reverse what has happened with the Dead Sea, or to change that?
I'm happy to go first. I wrote a whole chapter in Let There Be Water about that. So I'm glad to talk about that. The first matter is, you're absolutely right. I mean, pretty soon it's going to be called the Dead Puddle. It's shrinking the dam, and a shrinking part of that is climate change, the additional the additional heat from climate change is evaporating the water at a faster rate. Part of it is industrial policy. The Dead Sea Works removes a lot of the water to create the base material for fertilizer to help farmers all around the world grow their food better. We can argue if that's a wise policy or not a wise policy, but that's just, it's a fact. And then the upper parts, the things that once upon a time in antiquity flowed into the Dead Sea before there was climate change, you know, all the way north, the Don, the Chatzbani, and so forth, rivers that would flow then into the Sea of Galilee, and then from there into the Dead Sea, into the Jordan River. That has been cut back very significantly because that water is taken for agricultural and other use in the far north. And so the Jordan River, contrary to the spiritual, which says Jordan River deep and wide, I don't think it ever was deep or wide, but in fact, now it's mostly a trickle for most of its flow. Now, in terms of, I'm sorry to go on for a little bit longer, but what I wrote about in my chapter, and it's a great tragedy, and where I have something I use this saying all the time in my public speaking, and I'll say it again here, which is that politics manages to muck up water all the time. You can't solve the problem without politics, but politics, especially geopolitics, creates all kinds of problems. And so about 12 years ago or so, a very wise Israeli man came up with this idea of taking water from Eilat, and then from a gravitational basis, the Dead Sea is below the level of Eilat, and just using the force of gravity, flow the water from the Red Sea, where Eilat is, flow it downward. I mean, it's northerly direction, but it's altitude-wise, it's lower. And using no external pumping, just force the water to flow into the Dead Sea. But that wasn't the trick. The trick was that then at the point where it was going to meet the Dead Sea, the water was then turned into hydroelectric power, and the brine, and the water was desalinated using that hydroelectric power, so there's no external energy. The brine, the salty part of that, would then be redeposited into the Dead Sea, which would give it circumference and volume. And the fresh water would then be diverted into what would be newly created Israeli desert farms, in exchange for which Israel was going to create new desalination opportunities for Palestinians in the West Bank and for Jordanians around Amman and other areas around Amman, Jordan. And it was a wonderful project. It was very wise. There were some environmental concerns about the quality of the brine and so forth, but put that aside because that could have been addressed. But what ended up happening was the Jordanian parliament vetoed it because they didn't want to be in partnership with the Israeli government on something as helpful as this would be to their own interests. And this is again and again and again the story of water in the Middle East, is that people act in a counterproductive way, painfully counterproductive way against all pragmatic interests, because they would rather sabotage themselves than have any partnership with Israel over water. It's really quite a sad and tragic thing. By the way, just
So
to say,
has that canal happened at all, the red to dead?
No. It was millions, tens of millions of dollars was wasted on engineering projects, but not a single kilometer of it was built. And I just want to say is that Israel, though, contrary to what you might think from what I said, Israel provides the West Bank, Palestinians in the West Bank, at 60% of their household water from Israeli water supply. And in the Gaza Strip, it's a little more than 15% of the total water, even during periods of conflict when Hamas or PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, are at war with Israel, the water never stops flowing. It's really quite something. And the Kingdom of Jordan currently gets about 15–20% of its water from fresh drinking water, household water from Israel as well. So there are programs in place, but the idea of building a big infrastructure project that would have formal cooperation is something that is a bridge too far for the Jordanian parliament. I think obviously to their great detriment and to the detriment of the Dead Sea and the natural environment. I'm sorry, for you asking, Ariel?
Well, I was going to say, Seth, you talked about how politics creates all kinds of problems. And Maya mentioned in her introduction how the government is limiting the power of the environmental ministry to do anything meaningful on whether it's climate change or other environmental concerns. Tell us a little bit about that, Maya, where you see some of the pain points, some of the problems.
Well, just to touch first upon the Dead Sea, I can tell you that these days there's actually a new campaign that was initiated by former member of Knesset Miki Rosenthal, who's a longtime protector of the Dead Sea, and he put together a group of all the big environmental NGOs, and they're starting a campaign calling for a national plan to save the Dead Sea. So that's actually happening these days, and if anybody here is interested in that, then I'm sure the coalition would not like any type of assistance, because we need all help possible.
But
Um,
nothing has been built so far. I mean, there's been no
it's
steps
it's
forward.
it's now it's happening these days. It's really news almost. It's from the past few months, and we have so many front lines that we're dealing with at once, so it's not actually raising its head and becoming a strong campaign. Could you repeat your question? Sorry, Uriel.
Right, you talked a little bit about how the government is limiting the power of the Ministry of Environment.
Yeah, so there are a few things. First of all, the government totally misunderstands. It doesn't have any vision of looking forward to see how the development is happening in the EU or in the United States in terms of preparing for the climate change and the adaptation and the mitigation and what it needs to invest in. And it puts the majority of its efforts into developing offshore drilling for gas and oil, creating huge um, debt. A lot of investments are going to be invested into energy sources, new energy sources that will, serve the country for the next 10 years or so. But as the interest in it, the international interest in gas and oil is going down because of the climate change, and we're going to be stuck with a lot of infrastructure that is for the wrong type of energy. Instead of investing these billions into the solar energy and into the solutions that would make Israel into a leader. Then to add to that, we see that they're taking away people from the green police. Some of them are going to move to the new national security ministry led by Itamar Ben-Gvir, and then the ministry itself, environment, is not going to have people to actually do the inspections and to protect ourselves. Then the government feels that the Ministry of Finance feels that in order to help businesses here in Israel, the best way to help, they have a confusion between bureaucracy, which really needs to be changed and reduced here, to policy, and to regulation. And they want to bring down the environmental regulation, and for polluters not to need to come and report as much as they do today. And we're saying that they don't report enough even these days, and there's not enough fear by polluters, because they know that nothing is going to actually happen to them, and these things are going to be even worse. And during these past few days, there were a few actually achievements that as the environmental community managed to succeed. Like, for instance, they wanted to take out the environmental planners from all the planning committees, because like, environment is like is the nudnikim. They're the hazards. They're just saying things that people don't want to listen to, and they're putting into treating differently trees, old trees versus new trees. An old tree, they're taking down tens of thousands of trees around the country, and they're planting instead of them these very small trees that would need 50 to 100 years until they become substantial. And we're in a country that is considered a hotspot, and therefore we're suffering even worse than others from the heating climate and becoming into a desert. And we need the trees in order to control the weather. There are many, many problems and many mistakes. All the planning of the infrastructure and of the new towns and the new neighborhoods have tons of problems and mistakes, and many of the people in the government know it, but they're saying, time is pressing, we don't want to lose any more time, so we would rather just build and count the apartments that we're producing, just like as if we're in a monopoly game, not understanding that this is the quality and the health of our lives, and the possibility to actually live here for our 100th birthday with clean oil, with clean air and clean soil and clean food. It won't last if we don't manage it, responsibly today. And it's very, very disturbing.
So just to clarify, Maya, when you talk about Israel cutting down trees, the circumstances for that are when they build housing. You're saying that's when trees are getting cut?
They're cutting down trees whenever they can. They just put it, they don't regard it at all. They don't do any planning that tries to take the trees into consideration in the first place. They would take down like a bunch of 10, 20, even more trees because they want a parking area for the tractors. And they are now talking about taking down a whole oil tree plantation, old trees, because of some kind of planning, construction kind of plan. And the thing is that once the public comes and puts the truth into their face, and there's a whole campaign on it, so suddenly they stop and they think, and many times they're willing to change, but it won't happen unless there's a fight, and nothing is done properly without this fight, and there's not enough discussion, not with the public, not with the scientists, not with professionals, just have people in the ministries looking at through the prism of finance only. And I understand the financial needs, we're not against it, but what we're saying is if you do the proper development, we will cut down on all the health costs that we have here, because we have tens of thousands of people who are sick already today with diseases that we could have saved if we had a cleaner environment. Nobody is looking at the bigger picture. Nobody's looking at a holistic way of managing everything, and it's very disturbing.
Maya and Seth, I want to ask you both about where energy consumption comes into play here. Maya, you mentioned that Israel is investing more in gas infrastructure. A decade ago, the country discovered two major natural gas fields under the Mediterranean, Tamar and Leviathan, the Leviathan, and those have become turned Israel from an energy importer into an energy exporter. So my question to you, Maya, would be, well, yes, it is, natural gas is a fossil fuel, but that natural gas is being used to replace coal, which is even dirtier than that. So
I wish.
is that not good as an interim step?
It's not happening. Less than 10% of our energy today is on gas. Even, they've had many years already to change and to invest into opening energy plants based on gas. They're not doing it. We're still on coal. We're still everything is being wrong here. They're not doing anything correctly. They're not meeting the obligations that they made, and the reason that they're bringing down the standards of the Clean Air Act, which is one of the most important regulations that we have in Israel, is in order for the ministry, the company that is managing the energy efforts, to actually use more coal and reduce the standards that we have on the Clean Air Act. Because
so you're saying that there's that, my understanding, I found an Israeli government source from 2020 that said that at the end of 2019, Israel's energy sources were 66% natural gas, 27% coal and other fuels, and 7% renewables. You're saying that that's not the case?
No. I don't know the exact numbers. The 10% is on the renewable energy. It's not on the gas. I'm not sure exactly the numbers that are on gas, but I can tell you for a fact that because the energy efforts now want to enhance the amounts of coal that they're using, they're actually opening the Clean Air Act in order to allow that. Instead of going the right way, we're going reverse also on that.
Okay. Seth,
I'm really enjoying this 75th celebration of Israel. This is really great.
I'm sorry, but we need to be realistic, and I'll tell you this, Seth.
I love this. Let's crap on Israel some more.
I want to clarify.
It's not crapping. It's being realistic.
No, let's really crap on Israel some more.
As the host of,
it's going to make me feel even better that I
it's not.
It's
the demand and the expectation of the government to do the responsible thing. And I work 24/7 in order to help Israel become the strong state that it is. It's my country. It's been my home since the day I was born. And I do believe that things are possible. And like me, many other people in the environmental community know what needs to be done. And if we don't criticize them, nothing will happen. And I'm sorry that you feel bad. I don't feel
No,
nice bashing my country either, but the
I'm
fact
not,
needs to be
I'm
told.
not asking for you to say only good things, but I think we could leaven this conversation a little bit with great amounts of progress, because it is true that coal was once upon a time the main source of energy for desalination. And now it is not. It is now natural gas. And it is also true that Israel is attempting to create solar fields that will significantly transform the southern half of the country. So there certainly is good news too. So Maya, I'm just suggesting, and by the way, I thought this was a conversation about water, so I was taken by surprise. I didn't know we were talking about forks or about solid waste or about the bad government,
Energy.
or energy. But I will say that I think that we should leaven the criticism with two things. First is, if I may, I'm not hearing you and I have never met before. I don't know you. I know the organization you're part of, and I admired it. But I will say to you that I think two things. First is, we could leaven this conversation by also talking about advances that, of course, nothing is perfect. And second of all is, as I said in my very most opening remarks, about on an absolute scale or on a relative scale, please help us to understand which are the countries that are in a situation like Israel's that have the ability to do much more. Because I know, I live in the United States, I know that there's this very similar argument going on about the Clean Air Act, about the waters of the United States, and so forth, legislation and so forth that's going on in a country that is far wealthier, and a country that doesn't have to spend as much money as it does on defense or on social services, and it just seems that we should just give this a little bit of relative commentary as well. That's all I'm saying. But I'm not here to.
I agree, but that wasn't.
Oriel is running the conversation, not me. So
those weren't the questions that I was asked. So I'm talking about,
Okay.
Well,
enough.
from a relative standpoint, in many ways, Jordan and Israel are mirror images of each other. They're similar sizes of landmass. Jordan is slightly bigger. They both have similar size populations, and of course, they're located in the same neighborhood. Major differences that Israel has a huge Mediterranean coast, whereas Jordan only has a little snippet of the Red Sea. But the water situation is dramatically different. To your point, Seth, when you talk about Israel in relative terms, Jordan is a country that has to limit its residents' water consumption. They don't have desal plants, as far as I'm aware. In your writing and in your research, Seth, have you, what are some of the other comparisons that you've come up with where Israel stacked up against some other nations, whether in the neighborhood or elsewhere, is really just far and above, in a completely different place ahead of others?
Well, if you want to look at statistics, Israel statistically is the world leader in water issues. In terms of desalination, which we haven't talked much about, but which is an energy intensive water source, in terms of desalination, Israel has the world's most energy efficient desalination processes, even though it is still energy intensive. Israel has all kinds of safeguards for marine life in how they desalinate their water, which is also something that is significant. The other countries in the region that use desalination, mostly in the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia in particular, burn oil to power their desalination. It's exceptionally energy inefficient. It's highly polluting, and very much of a problem. And then in terms of other statistics like water loss to leaks and other terrible deeds, Israel is among the world leader. Israel's about 6-7% loss to leaks. In the United States, we're happy, we're thrilled where it's 25%, 22%. And there's communities in the suburbs of Chicago that are over 50% leak levels. And then finally, in terms of reuse of water, sewage water, Israel totally leads the world in this. Israel treats sewage throughout the country and reuses they treat almost all of it, but they reuse about 85 or 86% of the sewage That is the stuff that goes down the toilet, the shower, the washing machine, the dishwasher, the bathtub, and so forth. They treat almost all of it, but about 86% of it ends up being utilized for agriculture. And that water has been highly treated. It's very healthy, safe water. You could actually drink a lot of it. And most of it is pure enough to drink. And that is used for agricultural purposes, which takes enormous pressure off of the rest of agriculture to use fresh water sources. So therefore, there's more water that could be preserved for aquifers or for the Sea of Galilee or for rivers or just, to have it in reserve. And the comparison there is also very significant. As I said, Israel's about 85-ish%. Spain is at just south of 20%, and they're the second largest reuser of treated water in the world. The United States, which has grave problems. So most of my current work for the last many years is in super dry regions like the US Southwest and other stressed areas in the United States. And the treatment of water in the US is a very low level, about 6% nationally, and no more than 20% anywhere. So that's really a statement about how Israel, compared to other countries, really, and again, statistics can be used in a lot of different ways, but just in terms of statistics, Israel is really much a world leader. The other thing that Israel does, which I think never gets publicized, that I just adore about Israel, is that we all know that Israel very much has a startup mentality and very much encourages lots of innovation in a plethora of areas, not just water. But in water, there are just so many water startups, water and irrigation, drinking water, leak mitigation, and so forth. There's just so many startups in Israel, but that alone is not enough. What Israel then does is it has a process whereby the government, and this is a plus of the government then gives 80% of the research and development budget, the R&D budget of an approved startup. And it's a process for how you get approved. Not everybody can walk in and get it. But whether you're Israeli or American owned or French or British doesn't make a difference. If it's a good idea, the government is eager to help you develop that idea. And then what they do, they give incentives. If it's a municipal water idea, they give incentives to the municipal utilities to partner with these companies to help exercise, so as a beta test, what the use of that water would be like. And then furthermore, they in agriculture, they partner with farmers to encourage. I'm sorry about my phone is on the other side of the room. And they partner with farmers in a similar way, and they give them incentives also. And that way, after a year or two or three, these startups not only have all this money from the government for R&D, research and development, but they also have real world experience. And when it works, they can roll out almost immediately with a reference from this utility or farmer. They can roll it out in the rest of the country and the rest of the world. And that's why there are so many extraordinarily successful Israeli water startups that are out there that have changed the profile of water efficiency, energy efficiency in water, and reduction of pollution and so forth. I mean, one could write a book about it, but I just have a chapter.
I think you did.
No, I just have a chapter or two about it in the book. But I could update that book every couple of years because the amount of innovation is extraordinary. I'd be remiss if I don't mention that I'm currently involved with an Israeli startup, and you probably know Professor Uri Shani very well. Professor Shani came up with this revolutionary idea for agriculture to transform irrigation. And his device, now a company called NDRIP, like new-drip, replaces the classic idea of classic pressurized drip, which is very energy intensive and expensive for infrastructure to install. And for commodity crops all over the world, like wheat, corn, rice, sugarcane, and so forth, can replace the flood irrigation, which is 85% of worldwide irrigation, replace the flood irrigation by laying down these inexpensive and easy to maintain, easy to install, gravity-powered, zero external energy, zero, and not reliant upon solar or wind. It purely uses the force of gravity to power this system. And it's now in place in 17 countries, meaningfully in the US Southwest. It's really something that I'm extremely proud of, that it comes out of Israel, and something that I've very happily devoted years of my life to.
Maya, are there other bright spots that you see in the Israeli ecosystem when it comes to either innovation or when it comes to NGOs holding the government responsible? I know that Tzalul, the organization that you were with for a decade or so was on the forefront of helping save the coral reefs in Eilat and helping improve the water around Haifa, where there's a lot of industry and pollutants. So where else do you see some of the reasons for optimism or the bright spots in the
First
Israeli
of all,
ecosystem?
if I wasn't optimistic, I wouldn't work, 24/7. I do believe that we can do the change. We're putting a lot of effort these days in connecting the various people from the Israeli culture, from the mosaic, the Israeli mosaic, religious of all types and religions of all types, and working together, people that understand from left and right that the environmental problem is bigger than any dispute that we have. And we have groups that are working that don't speak about anything about politics in such a divided country as we are these days, because we understand that this is the most important thing. And it actually brings us together, and it creates friendships, and it creates relationships that we don't see many places, other places. And I do think that is something to be very optimistic about. And we're trying, and we're doing an effort to grow into mainstream audiences in the business sector. And we have more and more people in the business sector that are interested into investing not only into water solutions. And Israel is really considered the leader in water solutions. And now these days we have a lot of meat alternatives that are being developed here. And we want Israel to become also a leader in regenerative agriculture and in protecting the sea in many new ways that need to be developed, and to create blue economy methods that are constructed with being science-based and not money-based only. We have to change the way we look at things. There's a lot of money to be made, but because the climate crisis is happening so fast and is evolving faster than the scientists even predicted, then we don't have time to have second and 2 and 3 rounds of making a lot of money by creating maybe new solutions that are not the best. And we must make the effort to do the best investments. So these are the types of things that we're doing in my new organization now with ClimateNet, which is networking to net zero. And it brings together so many people, investors and entrepreneurs and government members and academics, everybody who gets the gravitas of the time and the opportunity of the time and the possibility of making all the wonderful things that we do with the water also in other areas come together in order to do this effort. So that makes me optimistic.
I want to encourage, we only have about 5 minutes left. If any audience members have questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat box and we'll try to work them into the conversation. What would you say, Maya and Seth, to Israelis who say, well, Israel is such a small country, what it does with regard to climate change won't really make a difference in a world of 6 or 7 or 8 billion people. You're talking about 10 million or so in Israel. And I think that that's kind of a viewpoint that is shared by many Israeli politicians, whether they say so publicly or not. So what is the appropriate response to that?
If I might, first of all, we are small and we are few, but we're not that few. We're 9 million people living on 22,000 square meters. I don't know how much it's in kilometers. I don't know how much it's in miles, but it's not a big country with a lot of population. And we actually produce emissions like a medium-sized kind of country. Second, there are many other small countries such as Israel that do make a bigger effort than we do. We see not only first world countries, but also second and third world countries that are putting bigger effort than Israel must, and every country must do the maximum that it can, because we're all together in the same situation. And as we're saying, first of all, we are looking at the reduction of emissions as a way to reduce the pollution, and this way at least we'll be clean, because if we change the way our transportation and our trash and our agriculture and everything is being conducted, will be less polluted and will be healthier, so we'll enjoy a healthier life, and we'll produce and our main thing is our our abilities to produce the solutions, and the solutions can help everybody, but we don't want to only export them outside. We want to also enjoy them. And if we're putting governmental money or Israeli money into investing into the development, we want to become a hub of a clean and good country, like we are in water. People are coming from all over to learn about the water. They should come to the other things as well.
Seth, let me put that question to you. You've talked about some of the remarkable things that Israel has accomplished in the last couple of decades and in its 75 years of existence. Where, looking ahead, let's say to Israel's 100th birthday in 25 years, where would you hope or expect to see some of the progress that Israel might make in terms of water? What kind of innovations, what kind of things, what might we see or might we hope to see on Israel's 100th birthday?
But by the way, I just want to say that the moral basis of the question you posed initially to the two of us, which is Israel's a small country, so why do we have to bother? It's not we, but speaking on the voice of the political leaders, why do we have to bother? I guess it may be true that China or India or the US or Russia are far greater polluters in an absolute scale or even on a per capita scale. I don't know that. Again, it's not my area of expertise. I don't know. But as I mentioned about myself earlier, is like I recycle everything that comes through my hands that I could possibly recycle. I'm mindful of my environmental footprint and everything I do. And sometimes I, go over the line, I suspect. I'm not a vegan, but within the scope of what I could do, I try to do it. And I think that that's no less true for everyone and no less true for every nation. And so therefore, I think it's a total cop-out for any country to say, well, when China and India fix it, then we'll do the same. That's silly. In terms of the follow-up question that you asked, I'm a great believer in human progress, and I believe that the private sector, in partnership with academia and in partnership with government, time and again has figured out a way to come up with solutions that transform our lives to the good. Obviously, sometimes to the bad, but mostly to the good. And human progress, not to get too philosophical, but the Malthusian economists who believed that the world could never possibly absorb even 500 million people on the earth because of the fact that there wouldn't be enough arable land to cultivate crops for people to eat, and there'd be starvation and cannibalism and so forth. They've been proven wrong again and again and again. The Paul Ehrlich population bomb of 1970, he wrote the book, was proven totally wrong. And the reason for that is because of human ingenuity, a robust private sector, smart government policies, and a robust academic sector. And as I look at that framework, there are a few countries that are the equal of Israel and getting ready for that structure. You have a highly motivated private sector. The country still has some elements of socialism, but particularly in water management. But overall, Israel incentivizes people to do startups and encourages that mindset through its popular culture. And because of that, I believe there's going to be a whole host of other innovations. In addition, you have government support financially for startups, and the academic sector is just extraordinary. I mean, I've been involved with just about every significant school, higher education in Israel in one way or another, and it's exhilarating. I mean, everybody talks about solutions, and at the same time, 3/4 of the professors you talk to ask, how do I monetize this? How do I do a startup around this? They know I'm an entrepreneur, and they're always asking me, can you give me some advice on how I can turn this into a big successful business? And I think that's the opposite of a bad thing. I think that's a fantastic thing, because people start to have incentives on that. I think I mentioned earlier about NTRIP, so I don't want to reiterate about that, but I think that I can't speak enough as to how revolutionary this technology is and how transformational I believe this will be in global agriculture. And I think that in the same way that Waze is sort of like a household name for traffic management and GPS systems, I believe NDRIP is going to be the same thing within another 3, 5, 7 years. And I think that there are other technologies that are coming out in the water space that are equally exciting in terms of how to transform how we transport water, how we use water, and how we create ever more robust crops. And Israel is really a global center. And on the one hand, Israel is just 9 million people. On the other hand, 9 million is bigger than a lot of other countries. It makes you in the mid-tier of the global population. And there's, there may be a lot of dumb Jews, but there's also a hell of a lot of smart Jews. And clustered together here in Israel makes them both competitive with one another, but also collegial and cooperative with one another. And I think that, people can have fistfights and fight each other, and then turns out they're first cousins, or they go to parties. And, I love Maya. I love what she does. I think it's extraordinary, even though I, disagreed with her, in some of the things she said. But I can't wait to have a vegetarian meal with her very soon, vegan meal with her, even better. So I think that the culture of Israel is just so great. And I want to say one more word about the plastic forks and knives, because I saw that repeal with revulsion myself. Even again, it's not my area. And I thought, and this is something that I've spent a lot of years on, I do a lot of work with public education on key issues, not just water. And I won't go into that now about my personal biography, but I think that this is a key example of where there's an amazing, wonderful opportunity for the secular community to reach out to the religious and Haredi community. It's to make clear to your audience, the reason why the government repealed it is the Haredi community has 7, 8, 9 kids. They don't have room to wash all their dishes in the sink, so they use disposable plates and forks and knives. And I think there's an amazing opportunity for Israel to not only come up with alternatives to plastic with other compounds, using plastic that's used from trash or other sources of plastic, but also a fantastic and wonderful way to using religious ideation and religious metaphor to talk about the ways in which the earth is the Lord's. And it is we who are the stewards of that. And that is a very religious concept there in that idea. And I think that it would be just beautiful to see the secular community and the religious community find a way to partner with one another, if not over compulsory draft, but over how to preserve this special country for generations to come.
And happily,
Great.
that's exactly what we're doing. As I told you, that's why I'm so optimistic, because there's a lot more
Fabulous.
collaboration and a lot more discussion on these things, exactly with these messages.
Super.
All right. Well, thank you both for this really thought-provoking discussion. I know I learned a lot, and I'm excited to.
Can I suggest one thing, Oriel? I suspect that there's lots of people that on this call will have follow-up questions for us. I would love if Maya doesn't mind sharing her contact information. I'd love to share
Sure,
mine.
I'll write it down here on the chat now.
I am aggressive about responding to emails. I get lots of queries. I do a lot of public speaking. I do a lot of outreach.
Sure. So why don't you each share your email in the chat box, and you could also say it.
I can't type it on my right now, but I'll just say it. My name is the best way to get me. It's my website, www.seth, S-E-T-H, M like Mary, Mordechai, Martin, Siegel, SIEGEL.com. It's SethMSiegel.com. That's my website, and there's a way to communicate to me through that way. And Maya, if you could, through Oriel, send me your contact information.
I'm writing it down here for everybody, and it's very easy. My name is Maya. It's MAYA at ClimateNet, as you hear it, all in one word, .org.il.
And of course, you can learn more about Maya's organization by going to climatenet.org.il.
Actually, our website is in construction. So what you see now is a conference that we're doing in 2 weeks from now on carbon removal on the end of next month. Carbon removal. And if there's anybody in Israel who's interested in that, I'm more than welcome you to join. It's going to be fascinating, very important.
By the way, also,
thank you. And I want to invite everybody to join us next. We're out of time.
We're out of time. Okay, never mind. Okay.
Okay, but I want to invite everybody to join us next week at the same time, 12 p.m. Eastern, next Tuesday, for another conversation about Israel's environment with former Knesset member and environmental activist Alon Tal, among others, about Israel's population growth and how to manage it wisely. So thank you, everybody, for participating. And a special thank you to Seth and Maya for this wonderful discussion. I appreciate it. And
thank you, Oriel, for moderating.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.